Jordan Musen is an attorney and author who lives in Los Angeles. His award-winning debut novel, The Read, which is also a two-time finalist in the Next Generation Book Award for First Novel and Genre Fiction. The novel is also an IPPY Award winner for Best Religious Fiction. And in today's episode of Auto Interview, it's my utmost pleasure, joy, and excitement to have on the show today Jordan Musen. How are you doing today, Jordan? Lovely to have you on.
Oh, I'm doing wonderful, Peter. Excited to be here and I'm a fan and excited to talk about my debut novel, The
The read.
Read, and hopefully we can get into it and I can explain what drove me to writing this and why I think it's important and hopefully your viewers will get something out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I must say, such an amazing joy, actually, that we are here to sit down across continent, virtue of technology connection, and the beauty of Zoom to have this conversation around the read. So, once again, I'd say thank you for coming on.
Glad to be here.
Absolutely. So, Jordan, we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of what actually inspired you to write the read. But then you've been a writer now for the past amazing 20 years, which I find to be quite commendable and quite awesome, really. And I am curious to ask you, what is your first creative spark as a writer? What is that thing that fuels you in, that makes you go on, unlike a car driving on a long highway that never gets run of fuel, is a fuel that keeps the car on going and a beautiful, engine connection in it. But what is that thing that fuels you in to keep going on this literature journey that you've quite been for the past 20 years, quite amazingly, actually? If we can start from there, actually, I think that would be very nice.
Well, Peter, I was the beneficiary of growing up in a very creative environment.
Mm.
I had a lot of creative siblings, and for example, my brother, my older brother, he did these musical reviews. He was a medical student, these musical reviews for his medical school, Brown University, and he also would direct a lot of his creative energies onto me. For
Oh.
example, when I was in second grade, he created this magic act where I was the great Giordini, and he and my mother arranged to have the second grade class walk down the street and watch me into our basement and watch me perform these feats of magic. It was a comic type of act, though. It wasn't. It was sort of like Penn and Tellerish, but instead of producing like rabbits out of hats, I would produce this slime-like substance called glop. And then we would have an intermission during the show, and a big sign would come down from the ceiling that would say, "Buy Giordini's Magic Glop." So he would do these kind of creative things with me. And my mother, she was also a very strong creative force. When she was
Wow.
a young teenager, she worked at this summer camp, and she was the drama director and would put on these shows for the kids. And then later she became a Sunday school teacher and then a
Wow.
principal. And she would put on shows for the sisterhood and also for the kids who were taking these classes. And sometimes they would be drawn out of whole cloth. And I remember her sitting at the piano in her house, just sort of cranking out these
Wow.
tunes and writing these lyrics. And sometimes she would put on already existing shows, and they would always be sort of would have uh, Judaistic type themes. Like we would hear a lot in the house of Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. There's another show called Two by Two that was performed by Danny Kaye that we would hear a lot of, and that was about Noah and the Ark. And
Wow.
along with these creative, getting this osmosis from these creative people, I my folks are avid readers and they read all these detective books. But they would have one book though in their big collection of books, and that was the Hebrew Bible. And I would sometimes grab that and just read that, and I just fell in love with the stories, the
Wow.
literature, and I just found that that was a joy, and that was a love. And then later, when I became a teenager and then into my 20s and 30s, I channeled my creative impulses first into songwriting. and I did get as far as writing a jingle for the United Way, but I am not a performer. And Dylan kind of killed it for the people who just wanted to be songwriters. You really had to be a singer or songwriter. You had to do both, and I
Yeah.
couldn't perform.
Yeah.
So then I left songwriting, and then I tried to do screenwriting.
Mm.
And screenwriting, I did well enough to have a screenplay that was shopped around by Imprint Entertainment. They're a production company that did the Twilight series. But it's very difficult to get an original screenplay to be produced because it has to be what they call in the business execution dependent.
Yeah.
Most production companies they really risk adverse and they are looking to prior art like comic books and so forth to
Mm.
for movie ideas. So it's really difficult to get an original idea. And so I later then moved from that to novel writing, where you had more control.
Wow.
And if even if nobody in the world wanted to work on your book, you could always self-publish, right?
Absolutely.
So you asked me about the title of the
Yeah.
book. How did that come about? So the title, The Read, I first have to give you a let me give you like a one sentence synopsis, and later, if you want to, we can dive and talk
Deeper
about
into
a
it.
little bit about the plot. But the log line of the book would be, would be that this is this takes place around 930 BC in ancient Israel, and the book is about how this ancient African woman writes these stories that eventually become the Hebrew Bible. And how did I come up with the title, The Read? Well, the read is really, Peter, it's a metaphor on
Mm.
many levels. If you have the weed is kind of like this grass that grows along the Nile River, and if
Wow.
it's untreated, it just clumps and then drifts with the tide. My character, my protagonist, Keb, she she's the reed in that sense, because in the beginning of her life she doesn't have really have control over what she wants to do. She is at the mercy of these other forces, and she is this reed drifting with the tide. Then later, when she learns how to write these stories, her character changes, but it's still metaphorical to the reed, because the reed is that writing instrument that you use when you dip into the inkwell and you write on your papyrus and you're a scribe. And
Mm.
that writing instrument, it's strong, it's solid, it's unyielding, unbending, and that's her character as she gets older. On top of that, there's another metaphor with the reed, and that is throughout the novel,
Yeah.
Keb, when she writes these stories, questions whether the stories come from her mind or
Mm.
whether they are divinely inspired from her God, Yahweh. And is
Mm.
she really just the holder of the reed, or is she more than that?
Mm. Oh, wow. I must say that you've got an amazing story in there. Beautiful illustration, and I like the way you run us through the background, the making, the foundation of all of these things. Quite amazingly. Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing. I appreciate that. And now, historical fiction often requires a balance between fact and imagination in so many ways, if not most ways, actually. Now, I wanted to ask you, how did you approach blending research with storytelling? And also, the book explored the idea of who gets to write history, quote unquote. Yeah. What sparked that theme for you?
Well, I think as a historical fiction writer,
Yeah.
you really have a duty to create a world for your reader. You're inviting your reader to join you into this world,
Yeah.
to spend some time with you on this journey, and
Yeah.
hopefully go from page one to
The
the end.
next. Yeah.
So you're world building, and you have a duty to to create an accurate world. I think
Yeah.
if your reader's going to be spending time with you, you owe this to the reader.
Mm.
So I spent months and months and months trying to figure out what do people eat, what if since I had some scenes taking place in in farming communities, what the
Yeah.
farming implements, to try to
Absolutely.
give an accurate view of this world.
Mm.
And the thing though is that there is you want to be factually accurate. Um, and one of the reasons you do want to become factual accurate, not only is it to that world building, but if you later on when you write the book and it becomes successful, hopefully, and you get the reviews, you really don't want people to be criticizing, oh, they got this fact wrong, this is completely wrong. I remember one of my favorite movies is Braveheart, and there are so many factual inaccuracies in there. For example, William Wallace has this affair with the Princess of Wales, but in real life, historically, she was only a toddler, a baby at the time of his revolt. So this affair that he has with her could not have existed. But I like this quote that Mark Twain has, is that where he says, you should never let the truth get in the way of telling a good story. You
Mm,
can change that to never let the facts get in the way of telling a good story.
mm,
Um, so sometimes you do have to bend the facts a little bit to make that
yeah.
story advance. And there's also another issue too, where if you have too many facts, it could be a problem because you
Mm,
want the book, the novel to be submersive. You want the person to experience the world, to taste the food, and so forth. But if you have too many facts, it's
mm,
really going to bog it down and slow down the read. And you don't want that. You really want to have everything on the page to be something that's interesting. A friend of mine told me that she hates these books where you spend 3 pages describing a leaf. And I agree with that. So
right.
you may have a whole world of facts that you think are interesting to you. Eventually, you got to get to the point you got to say, is this essential to the plot? Is this essential to the character? One of the things that I was able to do, I thought successfully, is that I can write, I think, pretty interesting sentences and use some metaphors,
Mm,
and with these metaphors, sort of throw in a little bit of the world in there. So let me just give you one example. Here is a scene where our hero Keb, she's talking with, and we have this passage here. He passes some wind. He passes some wind. His face tries to hide the embarrassment. When you
mm,
become aged, the body, like an old harness, shows its wear. He need not be ashamed. Still, that mind of his is a blade, fresh off the whetstone. Fresh off the
mm.
whetstone. So
Wow.
I'm throwing some facts about this world. I'm using it to make a kind of an interesting sentence. I don't think I'm bogging down the read, but I'm getting some of this world building in there through an
Yeah.
interesting sentence. Now, I think you asked who gets to write history
Yeah.
and what sparked that idea for me.
Yeah.
Well, in my 20s and 30s, one of my passions that I developed was, and I think it's had to do with this coming from this Jewish background and hearing these
Mm,
musicals and getting a chance to read the Bible. I was very curious about biblical authorship, and I just read a slew of books about who could have been these authors who wrote the Bible.
oh,
And one of the central ideas that has come down to us from these German scholars from the 1700s and 1800s is
yeah.
this hypothesis that there may have been four main writers, and then a redactor during the exile period when the Jews were in Babylon.
Mm,
And I'm not going to get into the weeds onto that, but two of those writers, one of them is called the J writer, and this person lived in Judah apparently,
oh,
based on a lot of the stories we're told had to do with geographic places in Judah. And then another writer lived in the northern kingdom of Israel, and they call this writer the E writer. I have my hero Keb as both the J and the E writer. Now, along with the about this hypothesis of these four individuals that could have been authors,
yeah.
some scholars have posited the idea that a lot of the stories that the J writer wrote
Mm,
had to do with women,
mm,
dealing with a lot of the wives of Israelite patriarchs. So there's a lot of stories about Sarah, who was the wife of Abraham, a lot of stories about Rebecca, who was the wife of Isaac, and Rachel, who was the wife of Jacob. and stories about Jacob's daughter-in-law Tamar. And we
Right.
had so many of these stories about women, and stories that really need a good feminine eye, I think. For example,
Mm,
there's one story where the patriarch Jacob, he has to flee Canaan because he's at war with his brother, and he
mm,
spends some time in this place called Iran, which is Mesopotamia. There he meets his love of his life, Rachel, and he has this agreement to spend 7 years working for his father-in-law Laban, and then he gets to marry her. 7 years goes
wow.
by. He has this marriage. His bride is all veiled up, and I says the next day, it's not Rachel, it's is her ugly sister Leah. And so he has another agreement with Laban to work another 7 years to eventually
Mm,
marry Rachel. And he does. And after these 14 years have come and gone, he has spent enough time in Mesopotamia. He wants to go back to Canaan. So in the middle of the night, he just takes his family, his belongings, and he runs off towards Canaan. Now,
mm,
Laban goes chasing after. And unbeknownst to Jacob, his wife Rachel has stolen the household gods, these idols,
wow.
and Laban wants these idols back. So he finally, 2 days later, he meets up with the Jacob's camp. He starts searching tent by tent by tent to trying to find these idols. And then he
Mm,
gets to Rachel's tent, and she's sitting on her camel, and she has hidden these idols underneath her riding blanket. Laban wants to search under that blanket, but she says, "Hey, I'm menstruating. The blanket is just soaked with my blood." And he
mm,
stopped searching. So, I mean, this is something that where some scholars like Richard Elliott Friedman and Harold Bloom have said, there's such a detailed eye to the feminine that there's a chance that maybe the writer of these J stories is a woman.
mm,
Friedman sort of thought it was a possibility. He didn't really think, it was likely, but he said it's possible. Harold Bloom was dead certain that it had to be a woman. And so that just gave me
mm.
this great idea. Why not write a story about a woman writing these stories in a patriarchal world where she has all these obstacles,
Yeah.
but the stories are generated by a woman. I just thought that would be a fascinating idea, uh,
Mm.
you know, for a story.
Oh, wow. I must say that I enjoy and I love listening to your beautiful answers to these questions. They are so in-depth, they are so beautiful, they are so educative as well. And I must say thank you very much for, sharing all of these beautiful stories, amazing narration, wonderful techniques, etc. Now I want to go a bit much further because readers often find themselves attached to certain characters in your book. Now, which character in the read do you feel closest to and why? Do you feel personally closest to, or would I say connected to? If you can tell us that and your reason why you had to choose a particular character, that'll be the first part of my question. And also, was there a particular historical figure or document or story that inspired one of your characters or spotlines, even anyway? I'm just curious.
Well, I think maybe to get to that, it might be helpful if I just give a little bit of the plot away, and
Yeah,
then so
yeah,
the
let's do
viewers
that.
can get a little context of the character.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So the story takes place almost 3,000 years ago,
Mm,
mostly in ancient Israel. But our protagonist is the daughter of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. I place
wow.
Sheba in uh, Sudan. A lot of
Mm,
scholars say if there was a Sheba, maybe it existed in Yemen, maybe it's in Ethiopia. I place it in Sudan only because I need her to go and take this trip up the Nile. So
wow.
she's sort of ostracized. She's living with her aunt and uncle because she's illegitimate. Royal couple, obviously, in Sheba wants nothing to do with her. And through some incident, she is forced to have to flee, and they want to send her back they want to send her to Solomon. So she takes she's on this cargo ship up the Nile, and when she reaches the Egyptian city of Thebes, she jumps ship and she runs into a priest. The priest befriends her and shows her name in hieroglyphs on the sand, and she finds this like magic. She finally gets this is her first taste of seeing writing, She then gets back on the ship, and the captain whips her for desertion. But eventually, the ship ends up in the court of she ends up in the court of King Solomon. And as most of us who have read any of the Bible know, that Solomon had 1,000 wives. So there's lots of these kids running around in the court, and kids are always miserable to other kids.
Mm.
So you can picture that you have this 8-year-old who doesn't know a word of Hebrew in
Mm.
joining this court, and she's dark skinned. They tease her. They call her burnt face. She has a nose ring, and so she has no friends. She's completely lonely and it's miserable. But she is given to the court historian as a
Mm.
ward, and she begs the historian to teach her not only how to speak and read Hebrew, acts that are only allowed for men,
Mm.
and women are not allowed to do any of that, obviously, in this patriarchal world, but to learn other languages as well. She starts reading all these different texts. She is highly intelligent,
Mm.
and but while she's doing this as a young teenager, she sees her half brothers and half sisters getting married,
Mm.
and she's incredibly lonely. But eventually, she does get married off to a scribe,
Wow.
and she has trouble conceiving. But when she eventually does, she gives birth to another dark skinned person who is rejected by her husband, another burnt face.
Wow.
But but she does get some solace because while she's raising the child, she goes down to the market. She barters all her jewelry to get a large blank roll of papyrus, an inkwell, and a reed. And she starts writing down these stories of the history of her people and
Wow.
to try to explain why her God, Yahweh, does what he does.
Mm.
Now, the scroll is eventually discovered by her husband, who is not happy at all because he should know what's going on in his household. Plus, a woman should not be doing these things. So he's
Mm.
enraged. He steals this thing and he passes it off as a work of Moses to advance his career. The scroll, these stories are eventually read at an important festival, and she's there
Oh,
at this
wow.
festival. And while nobody knows that she's the author, people love these stories, and she feels, for a moment, contented and fulfilled because now her life has finally mattered. Now,
Mm.
one other thing here is that at this time, Solomon dies, and the southern kingdom of Judah, the northern kingdom of Israel, have just broken up because of a tax revolt, and they're about to have war with each other. Maybe her stories can stop that. So that's what this book is about. Now, you asked me, what character do I relate to? I kind of relate to all the characters because I really try to see myself in each of these characters that I write. With Kev, I mean, I can't say that I am as marginalized as she is,
Mm.
but I have felt in my past very shy, especially in my youth. I'm still very shy now. I've been bullied, so I can draw those experiences and put that into the character, and I can also ask myself, knowing this character's beliefs
Yeah.
and this character's said, what would I do? What would I say if I was in that situation? So there's me in every single one of these characters. Her villains, the people who are chasing her. There's a lot of cat and mouse that's going on in this book, and the people that are protecting her, her loves. I can put myself in each one of those characters.
That's an amazing one, actually. I love your take on that. That is such a beautiful answer you've got in there. And I'd like you to show the book once again to the camera if you have a copy close by.
Can
The
you
read.
see it?
Yeah. Mm.
Right. One of the major themes of the book, I'm not sure if we've spoken about that, because I'm a big theme guy. And I mean, it's great. You really want your book to tell a story. That's the most important thing. It has to
Yeah.
be a
Yeah.
piece of entertainment. That's what we're here for, to write something so somebody can spend some hours with us and be lost in the story. But I think a good book becomes a better book if there's some things to think about,
Yeah.
and if there's theme. And also helps the writer because I
Absolutely.
use a theme kind of as a spine to sort of direct the story around. And the characters are often a different reflection of that theme. Like take the Wizard of Oz. What is the theme there? The theme it's what when the scare it's stated when the scarecrow at the very end asked Dorothy, "What
Yeah.
does she learn?" Or the wizard rides off. She says, "I've learned that I shouldn't go searching for a happiness because it's right there in my own backyard." So she already has what she's looking for, and that
Absolutely.
theme is reflected in all the major characters, right? The scarecrow, he's looking for a break, but he's been making decisions for the group right from the moment he got corn pole in the field. And the lion, he's searching for a heart, but he or for courage, but he already has it. The same thing with the Tin Man.
Mm.
So here, what is my theme? My theme is, well, I have a couple of things. One is I have some minor themes like that we're all trying to seek immortality. Um, and we can do it a number of ways. One is to reproduce and have children, but another way is to create art, and hopefully that art will continue to exist in the world. So that's a minor theme. Another one is how does someone who's marginalized get a voice in
Mm.
a world that is totally against them, especially in this world where it's so patriarchal. But my major thing is, does an artist have a responsibility, a moral responsibility once their work is let loose, or is there no responsibility? Or maybe the answer is they stop creating because who knows how things can get interpreted and misinterpreted. I think most of the time, 90% of the time, most of the time things are misinterpreted, but it's rather benign.
Yeah.
Nothing really bad happens if someone misinterprets a piece of art. For
Yeah.
example, how many pages of ink, how many mountains of paper have been produced on Shakespeare and his works?
Mm.
We can look at like Hamlet, for example, and there's so many different theories of what Shakespeare was intending with that play. And one of the ones that I love the most is with this guy named Carl Schmidt. And Schmidt, he takes a look at the whole setup where the old king is killed by Claudius, and then
Wow.
immediately he runs off with Hamlet's mother Gertrude and gets married. And Schmidt thinks, oh well, this is just a reflection of
Mm.
what happened with Mary Queen of Scots, because her second husband was this guy, Lord Darnell, and she
Oh.
didn't really like him too much. And she was having an affair with this other guy named Bothwell. And
Wow.
likely Bothwell and Mary, they killed Darnell by first by strangulation, and then they
Wow.
exploded his residence with dynamite. But then within 3 months' time, she ends up getting married to Bothwell, which didn't really sit well with her fellow elites, and she ended up losing the crown, and things
Mm.
went from bad to worse. But the thing is, okay, that's an interesting theory. Does that do anything that any harm? No, not really. I mean, the
Not at
guy that
all.
produces the theory, Schmidt, he gets a lot of money for producing the theory. He sells a lot of books. He gets money for it. Is there any really harm in suggesting this misinterpretation? No, but there
Right.
can be harm, and then there can be a lot of bad harm. For example, movie Taxi Driver comes out, and somehow this guy Hinckley gets the idea after watching it that the movie suggests to him that he should go and assassinate Ronald Reagan, President Reagan.
Mm.
Um, and then it gets worse when you talk about religious texts, because how many religious wars have we had because we can't agree on what these texts mean and how to worship God? Millions and millions and millions of people have died throughout the years with religious wars, and
Yeah.
through the Middle Ages and through the Renaissance. How many people died at the stake, were purged by fire because they were considered heretics and infidels? So there can be a danger, and Kavesh is producing these stories. Sometimes good happens, but sometimes there's these unintended consequences.
Yeah.
For example, if I can mention one example that's sort of early on in the book,
Mm.
she finds herself in prison, and she befriends this guy, or a fellow cellmate by the name of Nebbit. And Nebbit doesn't understand why he's been charged with a capital offense, which likely is going to result in his execution. He's been
Mm.
found to be guilty of lying with a man as one lies with a woman. And this is a totally new crime that has just come up that the police have created. This being a homosexual is now capital expense, now capital sentence. And Nevitt tells her, I don't understand why I'm here. They've been telling me about this guy by the name of Lot and this place by Sodom. I never heard of these places. I don't know what I did that was wrong. And this is and this whole thing with Lot and Sodom is a story that Keb created in my
Mm.
book, and she intended it. And just quickly, just to remind people what the story was about, is that um, God has sent two angels into Sodom to try to find 10 people who are righteous. And if he can do that, he's going to spare the city. He can't find anybody except for Lot, Mrs. Lot, because she doesn't have a name, and her two virgin daughters. So he only finds four of these righteous people. And he sends these two angels there to have a meal with Lot. And while they're having this meal, the Sodomites start banging on the door and they want to have carnal relations with these two men. Now, Keb
Mm.
writes, and Lot, in his infinite wisdom, decides, okay, I'm going to save my guests the embarrassment of having them have sex with the entire mob here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try to offer my daughters instead to the mob.
Mm.
Brilliant Lot, and he's one of the four righteous people. But then the whole incident is stopped because Yahweh shines this light on the crowd, and then they go away. But
Mm.
she writes the story only for the purpose of showing how you shouldn't mistreat your daughters and that you should not try to have sexual control over a god. But the priests have misinterpreted that story to say homosexuality is a crime. So
Yeah.
she knows the power of these stories can be misinterpreted. And she keeps on wondering throughout the book
Mm.
whether she should continue trying to write these stories, maybe correct something that went awry when she wrote an earlier story, or whether it's safer for her to do nothing at all. You know,
Mm.
and but yet she needs to write these stories because there's something in her and something in all of us who are creative to
Mm.
to be to create. It's just part of human nature to need to and maybe it has to do with this idea that by creating maybe it's a form of immortality and that's what's driving us. But she
Mm.
hasn't she finds solace in writing these stories. She knows that when she's writing these stories they're fantastic. She has a high opinion of herself in her writing. She knows she's probably the best writer out there, and that's a driver. But she also thinks that maybe she can do some good even though there's a possibility that something bad might happen. And in fact, when she writes these stories, she is not the benefit to many of these stories. Not only her, but her countrymen are in a very bad position because these stories have been let out. And this theme too is something that is not new. We see this all the time, especially like in science fiction, right?
Yeah, that's
What
true.
you go back to like which the first science fiction story, Mary Shelley and Dr. Frankenstein. He creates this creature, which he abuses, but he lets that creature he can't control. And if you look at
Yeah.
most science fiction movies, there's this technology that's out there that you just is let loose and you think you can tame it, but you can't. And it has these, it goes awry and into places that you could not even contemplate. And it's the
Mm.
same thing here with what do? Do you just not create? Do you not create technology? Do you not produce literature? Do you just stop because of these unintended consequences? Or do you create it anyway and just hope for the best?
Mm. Oh, wow. I love your answers to these questions. You create anyway and just hope for the best. And I love the fact that you mentioned that if there are too many facts, there could be a problem. That's a beautiful line as well, a beautiful statement. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Just apart from the read, do you have any other works that you've authored or say currently working on?
Well, I did do a screenplay that was shot, as I think I mentioned earlier, by Imprint Entertainment. It did really well
Oh.
by in a contest that was put on by the Academy of Motion Pictures, the people who do the Oscars, and it got some for a few moments, it got some attention, and that book, that screenplay, which I later turned into a novel, which I never ended up publishing, has kind of this similar science fiction type theme. In that story, it's called Decibel. Uh, there is a creator of technology. His name's Ezra, and he creates something called a reconstructor. And
Mm.
his what he wants to do with the reconstructor is he wants to reconstruct sound waves and be able
Wow.
to hear historical things that happened in the past. For example, he wants to hear Abraham Lincoln recite the Gettysburg Address. If he could do that, he's a happy man. And so he creates this reconstructor. He lets it loose in the world, and but he does not realize that almost with immediately once the people have it, that instead of going back 50 years, 100 years, 1,000 years to reconstruct sound waves, people end up going back only a few moments in time. And what happens is that people use this so they can eavesdrop on their neighbors and on their family. And he has turned the whole world into a place where privacy doesn't exist. And the government has turned into a police state because they're eavesdropping on everybody. And he is so upset with this whole thing. And he's very suicidal. I'm not going to get into the plot, but it's kind of similar to what I did with Kev, because only instead of technology, she's producing these stories that have these unintended consequences. Um,
Mm.
so, um, I've written other stuff, but this is my debut novel, The Read, and you can find this online anywhere where they're selling where
Mm.
they're selling books. Barnes and Noble. If I can do a shameless plug, Amazon, and in the UK, you can find it at Waterstones online. Anywhere that they're selling books online, you can get this.
That's amazing, really. That's really amazing. And I left a link in the description part of this interview. Interested viewers can get a copy of the book directly on Amazon and Barnes& and Nobles on your website and also on other platforms. I also left a link to Musen's social media pages for possible followings. Yeah, before I wrap up, I'd like to ask you the single question. Did you see yourself writing historical fiction, or did the story of the read surprise you by demanding to be told?
Well, I think I'm very comfortable writing historical fiction, maybe more so than modern fiction, because I'm like the least technical
Um,
person in the world. We had problems with logging on with the Zoom to start the interview, for example. I think I've been born too late. I should have been born long ago. And I always kind of wonder what it would be like to live maybe 500 years ago. It would be a tougher life. I probably would be like a subsistence farmer, but maybe I might have been happier. I would be part of this great chain of being. I know that I would know my place in the world. I would know that I report to a lord, reports to a duke, reports to the king, and that there's this hierarchy of level. And if I do what I'm supposed to do, my miserable life will end soon enough, and I'll end up in heaven. And maybe I'll be happier back then, even though
oh my
there's
goodness.
no air conditioning, no indoor plumbing, no anesthesia. So I don't know if I really want to be, live in that type of era. Maybe, maybe a little bit closer to modern times, perhaps. But I always kind of wonder, what do people are people that much different than they are today when they're living with lesser technology? I always found that kind of fascinating, and that's
Mm,
what sort of
yeah.
drawn me to writing historical novels. And I just love history.
Mm,
Um, when I was a child, when my parents went to England, they came back and they gave me this book of kings and queens of England. It was a poem about each king and queen, and
mm,
I just fell in love with that. And uh, these history to me is just made of these beautiful stories
yeah.
of how people once lived, and that has attracted me, and that's why I think I really love this genre, and it's world building, which is great. I'm not a fantasy guy, but I can't place myself into the past, I think, and I can try to take the reader and put them into the past as well.
Wow. That is such an amazing answer to that. Thank you very much for sharing. And thank you very much for coming on to, sit with me and have this beautiful conversation around the read. This was really impressive. Once again, thank you very much.